Summary of Principles of Motion written by Sara read. Chapter 1. The night before Lila's funeral, I rose from my nest on the couch in my study on the third floor of the tower. I had not been sleeping well. Across the room, a damp wind blew through the open window. With both hands, I wrestled it down. The window panes and sashes were curved to match the walls of the tower, and they tended to stick. This one wouldn't shut the last inch, so I gave it up, turned off the lamps, and returned to my couch, pulling a throw blanket over my legs. Outside, blue ESH beams of streetlight illuminated the top limbs of the trees as they swayed in the wind. Since Lila's death, I had felt so unmoored that it was almost a physical sense of drift. After spending nearly every hour of every day spooning applesauce off her chin, drawing her ancient arms through threadbare sleeves, bathing and changing her, waking up when she cried out in the night, I felt her absence like a missing chamber of my own heart. So I went where I always went when I needed an anchor. Back to Freeholtz. My family thought I was in denial, spending the days and nights after her death closed in my study, but it wasn't denial. It was comfort. As Lila's needs had increased, I'd had less and less time for Freeholtz conjecture, and now after all that time away, I had new perspective, like seeing it for the first time. I could feel the answer just at the extremity of my understanding. I was also exhausted. I tugged the blanket toward my chin. Past the rain-rippled windows, the air, water, and trees all moved in apparent entropy, so much turbulence against the unmoving light, and as a mathematician's mind tends to do, mine searched for patterns. They were always present, and always changing. I must have slept, because I woke to dark and stillness. The fitful rain had stopped. A single cicada chirped in the top of a tree. As I ascended into a sleep-loosened consciousness, a light glinted, a bright, inner North Star, and in less than an instant I was on my feet, as awake as I had ever been in my life. Comprehension cannot be predicted. It may come when bidden, one may struggle after it for a lifetime, or it may wait 200 years to send its bright ray through the darkness. That night, comprehension picked me. It picked 4 a.m, after a week of relentless, grief-driven focus. But it found me ready. I knew from a lifetime of training that when the ray of light appeared, I had to keep my eyes on it and not look away, no matter the consequences. Though the rest of the third floor was a glorified attic with sloping roof and dormer windows, the tower room maintained the grandeur of the rest of the house. I paced the floor, eyes closed, head tilted up. I forgot the emptiness of the bedroom below my feet where Lila had breathed her last breath. I followed the bright rail of my thoughts as they plunged through the darkness, skimming along, light and swift, to the very center of Freeholtz conjecture, where I could finally see the last remaining knot. It lay within the Gault function, itself contained within the Wong-Hickman method, a central tool used to predict the motion of non-compressible fluids. The threads grew clear, loosening, almost floating. From a bent bit of gutter, a single rivulet of water tapped onto the balcony. The pattern began to form. Turbulence, resistance. Constraint pulling inward, and in parallel, release, spooling out. The opposite of friction. Twin forces, intertwined, dancing. Math is logic purified to its essence. And logic seeks order and sequence. Deep within that last tangle, I separated the radiant strands. I rest-wrung them and laid them straight, end to end, and at last, they formed a jetway to the center of the universe. Feet barely touching the floor, I went to my board, 5 feet tall and 12 feet wide, built to fit the curved wall, with a hand-carved ledge at the bottom, and lifted a cool piece of chalk between my fingers. Daylight shone through the windows when I woke, still clutching the nub of chalk. There on my board were a series of functions and shapes in green, white, and yellow. A dimensional representation. A kind of mathematical shorthand. At that moment, it was not something I could have presented even to another mind such as my own. Still more a small pot holder than a perfectly woven tapestry, but it was all there. So much simpler than I had imagined. As if it had been there all along, which, like all math, it had. Done. 23 years of study. Done. My hands trembled. I blinked, sure that it would disappear or dissolve into nonsense as it had done so many times before. I turned my back, crossed the room, and looked at it from a distance. Still there. I opened the window and looked out. Back in the early spring, a work crew had started a renovation on the big house across the street. Men. Trucks. Lumber. The damp smell of oak and grass wafted in. It made me think of Isaac. I wished I could tell him I did it. I really did it. He always believed I could, if for no other reason than I believed it myself. There's a feeling when you meet someone, that somehow you've known them all your life. And not even all your life. Like you've known them all of some other life where you are completely yourself. Not the one you're living, where you are who people expect you to be, but some better life. The one you should have been living all along. That's how it was with Isaac. No one in my family had known him except Lila, and now the memory was mine alone. And perhaps even Lila didn't know what we became to one another. I turned and looked at my board again. It still seemed impossible, but there it was, and the afterglow of epiphany was heaven. Breathless astonishment. A floaty, weightless feeling in my chest. I had done it. At last. And after so many years, it came in such a sudden burst of light. This would vindicate me. It would prove that Dr. Margaret Brightwood was not a batshit crazy recluse after all. This would vindicate the little girl who people read about in the news, who had so much power and so much promise. A soft creak from the third-floor stairs startled me, and I jumped to my feet. No one ever came up here. Who is it? I pressed a hand over my racing heart. Meg? Are you all right? The door opened, and my panic melted, replaced by that fullness of heart which so often ends in tears. Sweet Lizzie. More sister than cousin. The sun, to my moon. Her golden hair was tied up, but a fallen strand stuck to her black dress. I plucked the loose hair off. What are you doing here? Are you okay? She looked at me, then scanned the room for what? They sent me to look for you. Oh my God. Chapter 2. Margaret Brightwood sat alone in her study, surrounded by the silence that only an intense focus on mathematical proofs could bring. The impossible theorem, as she had come to call it, was finally comprehensible in her mind. However, turning her understanding into a proof that could be communicated to others required a meticulous process, writing it out step by logical step, without shortcuts or shorthand. Despite the painstaking effort, Margaret's skills felt barely adequate for the task at hand. Dressed in her oldest, softest, and grayest work clothes, she opened a fresh, spiral-bound notebook and began the laborious process of transcribing her thoughts onto the lined pages. Although she spent a lot of time alone, she found solace in her work, especially when delving into the centuries-long conversation of mathematics. Legends like Pythagoras, Einstein, Ramanujan, and Nash seemed to accompany her, their collective wisdom enriching her solitary pursuit. Margaret's breakthrough proof, known as Freeholt's conjecture, needed a path to become public. However, after years of being unaffiliated with any university, academic journals were hesitant to publish her work, let alone a proof as groundbreaking as this. Traditional avenues were closed off to her. Arcs4.org, a platform where academics and non-academics shared their work for open review, seemed like a potential solution. Yet, Margaret hesitated due to past experiences of having her work borrowed without proper credit. The best way, she concluded, was to present her findings, not only as a means of protection against plagiarism, but also to speak about her work directly to the public. However, the prospect of presenting tormented Margaret. As a mathematician, she faced an additional challenge, her conventional attractiveness. In the serious and wise world of scholars, her appearance was often deemed a distraction. Nonetheless, she decided to push through and found a small regional conference in Connecticut in September. She registered to present on an acceptable but obscure subject, the loading hypothesis, and soon received an acceptance. 3 months passed, during which Margaret rarely left her house. Groceries were delivered, and the first-floor windows remained locked. Her only interruptions came from Lizzie, who brought food and coaxed her outside occasionally. Margaret lost sleep and weight, oscillating between joy and moments of frustration as she meticulously wrote out the proof in her notebook. The notebook, with its heavy-duty plastic cover, became a testament to her dedication. Mathematics, inherently collaborative, felt unnatural to her in isolation. She longed for a living, breathing colleague or a student to share the burden. Still, she pressed on, driven by the vision of presenting her groundbreaking proof. With the proof finally complete, Margaret faced the challenge of publication. The academic journals remained out of reach, and she feared the unpredictable landscape of arcs4.org. The decision to present at the conference seemed like the most secure path. The narrative then shifted to Margaret's observation of the house across the street, known as the General's. It was undergoing renovation, providing her with a distraction from her intense work. She watched a carpenter meticulously work on the building, finding a sense of vacation for her mind in the slow and methodical process. The passage delved into Margaret's past, recounting her arrival at Lila's house and her decision to leave a prestigious professorship at Halberstam, the MIT of the West. She recalled the arrival of her antique chalkboard and the moments of quiet contemplation it brought. Isaac Wells, a young man with a southern drawl and a toolbox, entered Margaret's life when Lila asked him to fix a balcony door. Isaac's presence provided an unexpected comfort to Margaret. As he worked, they engaged in conversation, and she found herself drawn to his easygoing demeanor. The passage vividly described their interaction, revealing a connection that went beyond their apparent differences in education and background. The narrative then circled back to Margaret completing the proof and preparing for her parents' visit. Her father, Dr. Henry Brightwood, expressed surprise that she was still working on freeholds after the funeral. Margaret's decision to present at the NES conference was revealed, causing tension between her desire for privacy and her father's enthusiasm for her achievements. Margaret's internal struggle intensified as her father suggested they attend the conference together. The passage ended with Margaret grappling with the word if as her father questioned the possibility of her making a comeback. Defiance crept in, and Margaret declared, "Not if. When." The narrative left readers anticipating Margaret's journey as she prepared to present her groundbreaking proof at the conference.